This story gets a bit dark towards the end. That part is not about the ghostly experiences, but I couldn't write it without the broader context. I lived in northern Maine during my senior year in high school. It's rural, and a very different lifestyle than I was used to. My father bought a very old and small farmhouse along the border with Canada. The house was a 2-story wood frame with a sad porch, peeling paint, and a connected barn that was falling down. It was a depressing, creepy house with small rooms and an abundance of flies, spiders, and in the fall, many ladybugs. In the no longer used outhouse in the barn, we found a ratty full-length bearskin coat. My father thought it was some sort of treasure, but I found it disturbing. The stairs to the barn loft were heavily chewed by porcupines, especially on the corners where they could easily bite. There was no actual central heating in the house. This is in one of the coldest areas of the country, where temperatures would drop to -30 Fahrenheit in the winter. In the basement, there was an enormous wood-burning stove that had been fabricated by a former owner. Managed properly, it would heat the entire house, sort of. I got used to being cold all of the time. I was always uneasy in that house. After we had been living there for a while, my father and his girlfriend would mention that they would have these strange experiences. They'd be lying in bed or on the couch and feel what they thought was a cat walking across their feet on top of the blankets. When they looked down, there was nothing there. They mentioned it on several occasions, and it became a recurring theme. They would report that it would often happen when they were asleep, and sometimes it would be something touching their head or their hair. One time, my father was sitting on the toilet and felt something cold firmly press against his bare thigh, or so he said. During the winter sometime, my father mentioned at dinner one evening that he had seen a figure in the early morning hours that day. He had awakened in the night and was startled to see a woman standing next to his bed. She was leaning close to him and just looking at him. When he woke up, she moved away and stood by the window, looking out at the dooryard. Then she faded away. It was just beginning to get light outside, and he could see her from the faint pale light coming in through the window. He described her as a woman around 35 to 40 and wearing a long dress. A little while after, I had moved away and gone back to Massachusetts. I got an excited call from my friend Jennifer in Maine, whom I knew from high school. I had told her at some point about the odd things that happened in the house. She'd been talking to someone on the day she called me, and somehow I came up in the conversation. And the guy she was talking to said, "Oh, that house he used to live in is haunted. My cousin lived there several years ago. She said that you'd be lying in bed at night and you'd feel someone touch your hair." That independent corroboration freaked her out, and she couldn't wait to tell me about it. I felt the phantom touch once, I think, on my feet, but that was really the extent of it. Other than the awful, creepy, depressing aspect of the entire house, I would be home alone a lot there, and even in the daytime, I would get scared in that house. More than 20 years later, I returned to the area while on vacation with my wife. I wanted to see the house again and showed her where I had lived. So we drove the 12 miles south from Houghton on US 1 to Wilcox Settlement Road. The house was still there, but it had gotten even creepier. Most of the siding had been torn off in an apparently abandoned project to add insulation to the thin walls. There was junk strewn about. An old battered pickup truck sat in the dooryard. It made me feel so sad to see the house in even worse condition than it was in when I had lived there. We stared at the house from the road where we had stopped. The car was idling in gear at the end of the driveway as we were taking in the scene. Where the house had seemed forlorn in 1987, in 2006 it had become an eyesore. The house had always seemed to me like a place where bad things might happen to someone, and because it was in a quiet, sparsely populated and densely forested place, those things and the person they happened to might be forgotten, or at least never mentioned again by the terms of the silent agreement of familial shame. Suddenly, a movement in the dooryard caught my eye. There was a man standing between the pickup truck and the front door, and he was watching us. I couldn't believe that we hadn't seen him. A disheveled, overweight man in a brown outdoor jacket. He was smiling and nodding his head slowly and waving his arm in a sweeping, beckoning motion, encouraging us to come closer. He didn't approach us or look at us with suspicion. He was silent, just nodding, smiling, beckoning. Come closer. That's right. Closer. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor and sped off. The road more or less dead-ended a short ways down, where the pavement petered out. I knew this, but had kind of driven off in a panic, and had to turn around and drive past the house again. I don't remember seeing the man on the second pass, or if we even looked. I don't know why he was waving unexpected outer staters into his dooryard in the waning daylight, but at the time I assumed that it had something to do with making sausages and grimy meat pies. Maybe it's not a place itself that's bad. Maybe it's that a place gets marked with an indelible psychic stain that becomes smeared and darkened with repeated abuses and horrors. A depression in which negative feelings and energy pool and swirl and engulf those who come in contact with it. I feel that it was already darkly stained when we arrived, and while we were there, it became darker still. I don't know what it would take to erase stains like that. Sometimes you visit a place from your past seeking catharsis, but it just tears off the scab and rubs dirt in the wound. I'll never visit that place again, but I don't think it will ever leave me. This sounds outlandish, but I promise it's the truth. I'm a 17-year-old male, and I've lived with my uncle, who I'll call Ty, in his cabin since the age of 6, for reasons I'd rather not disclose here. He's always been an outdoorsy kind of guy. Where his cabin is located, it's relatively secluded with miles between him and his neighbours, which may be why he taught me how to survive should I get lost at such a young age. This didn't happen too long ago. I was 11 during this encounter. I will never forget that day. At that point it was obvious I got lost. Maybe got a little too distracted playing with my handball and wandered too far into the forest. I felt scared looking around. All of it was just trees, and then fell to my knees. That's when I heard a "Hey." When looking up, there was a man standing in the clearing. Most probably would have freaked out in this situation, but the guy looked and sounded exactly like Uncle Ty. However, there was an unnatural sense of peace as he smiled at me. Carefully raising an arm, he proceeded to gesture over to a particular tree with a red ribbon tied around its middle. "Time to head on home, little one. Just follow the ribbons. Uncle's been awful worried about you." At first, I couldn't move, even when feeling a sense of safety, at least until he spoke again. "Go on now. He's waiting for you." His voice was strangely gentle and smooth as he encouraged me to leave. In that moment, I couldn't quite understand why there wasn't the faintest hint of fear in me. But what I do know is that I felt compelled to obey his words. Casually just strolling past the guy, not daring to look at him or retrieve my ball, consistently scanning the trees for more red ribbons and following them back to the cabin. My uncle immediately charged me as soon as I opened the door. He asked where I had been, and that sun was setting. Apparently I was playing longer than anticipated, and during that time Uncle Ty was cooking some stir-fry. I didn't get much sleep that night, but when I got out of bed the next day, there my ball was, right beside my desk. During breakfast, seizing the opportunity to ask my uncle if he found it, only for him to tell me that no, he didn't find it. Apparently he didn't know I'd lost it to begin with. But there it was, placed directly next to my desk, not a speck of dirt staining the surface. To this day, I don't know who or what I saw in the forest that day. To be honest, it's something I can live without knowing. My roommate and I at the time lived near a middle school and would smoke weed there around 1 to 2 a.m. out of boredom from time to time. We went there because oftentimes we'd loiter schools, graveyards and climb rooftops to smoke and get a nice view of the city, often to look for paranormal activity and to kill boredom. This particular school, however, had many of our friends believe that it could have been haunted. We would hop a fence, walk the open grass yard and smoke behind the bungalows where it was well lit. On the other side of the bungalows was a courtyard and patio in the centre where the kids would eat lunch. Then the main school facility, which was made up of red brick. So, while we get ready to start a smoke session, we could hear a heavy pair of footsteps and keys making a jingling sound, mostly the entire time down the dark corridor in the centre of the campus. Of course, everyone thought it could be a custodian, but the school was pitch black except for the street lamps outside of the property that kept the field visible. Also, I don't think a janitor would be at a school in the late hours on a weekend, so we never went further. Until one night, my roommate and I decided we'd make an attempt to go through. Of course, we blitzed our brains to high hell and stepped further into the dark. At first it was dead quiet and we couldn't see much, just the bungalow classes on the right, and the red brick building on our left, and straight ahead was the outdoor lunch tables. It was at that point we're halfway in the lunch area where things got weird. So, we are walking side by side, surrounded by several rows of aluminium tables under an aluminium roof. We still can't really see a thing, but I swear, and I mean I swear, I started to hear kids running, laughing, chattering, playing, yelling, and I couldn't do anything but press forward, as if in some kind of a dull trance. The noise going on made me question if it was really happening, but in the state I felt I was in, and I didn't want to break the silence either. It was also strange how it started off very faint and gradually gained volume the further we got in. Toward the end of the lunch area was a space where I could see a crack of light coming from the street, just over a red brick wall with several feet ahead of us. My thought at that point was like, okay, I've had enough. Thank God. And just when the chattering of children was loud enough, a school bell began to ring out, to which then it felt like I could hear that moment when kids start taking off to get to class. We get to the wall and hop over it, and end up at the main entrance of the school. While we were making our way back to the apartment, I told my roommate what was going on in my head, because the whole time we didn't say a peep to each other, except when we first got in. Strange enough, he tells me that he heard the exact same thing. Even the way we felt was similar. My hair still stands up just writing this. I don't think we ever went back, but if I did, I'd like to have done a more proper investigation. My mum's house is a strange place. One of my grandmas passed away in that house around 08-09. Antiques are decorated in various places of the house that belong to relatives and their friends who also passed away at some point in time. It's a 2-story home, and the TV room downstairs is under their bedroom, where the ceiling above would creak like the weight of a person moving about, and footsteps of someone walking around, except no one would be home when it happened. Trying to watch TV with that noise above your head was never fun. One time I was watching television with a friend, watching Ghost Adventures actually. We started talking about practicing some of the tests they conducted and how cool it would be, as we both thought something was off about my mum's place. It was at some point I said something along the lines like, that would be interesting to try, but not sure what to ask to get a response. And in mid-sentence, there was a prominent thud to our right, near the front door, near the fine dining table. This was a big house, so we got up from the couch and made our way to the dining area and turned the corner to find the source of the noise. Turning around the corner, I noticed a picture frame, an 8x10 laying face down on the carpet. So, it would have seemed plausible that it wasn't properly set on the surface of the old upright piano where sheet music is placed, because that's where it was set before the fall amongst a row of other picture frames. The strangest part is that the frame that fell lays up at an angle against the piano, above the keys, and the bottom is supported by a thin rectangular strip of wood that was approximately 1.5 inches tall and roughly 16 inches long. Someone would have had to have pulled the picture frame from the top to make it fall. A little unsettling, but the only thing that came out of our mouths was to comment on how weird that incident was. the only time anything moved. Then we went back to finishing watching TV.